Welcome to Dental Business RX. Practice success in 30 minutes or less.
Thank you for calling ABC Dental.
How many practice management ideas have you accumulated over the course of your career? Take a minute to think about it. Now, some of these ideas may have been more inspiration from personal experience or maybe lessons from the school of hard knocks. Something goes wrong and you know what not to do next time. And then there's the ideas you began hearing as far back as dental school, what you should or shouldn't be doing when you start practicing. And these ideas continue to accumulate as you talk to colleagues, read articles, go to seminars, and so on. And hopefully, you could think of a few of them that, when applied, worked out well. And while it might be a little harder to remember, you could probably think of some that really didn't pan out. We usually like to forget these. And with all this in mind, there are a few often repeated basic concepts about practice management that have been floating around the industry for years. As far back as when I started out in the 1990s, that are complete garbage. They're just not very good. They're the exact opposite of what you wanted to do. And a nice way of saying it is they're practice management myths. And when I came into the industry initially, I came from the business world, and I remember hearing some of these things. And my first thought when I heard them was they were completely counterintuitive. They were the polar opposite of what I learned to do in the business world. But being new to the industry, I thought, look, I'm going to reserve judgment. This is a new field, and see how these pan out when they're applied. Well, my initial assessment was right. These ideas in most cases did not only not work, they could be damaging to the business. But nonetheless, these concepts, or actions, whatever you want to call them, or myths, for lack of a better word, which too many doctors accept as if they are almost natural laws of dental practice management, are just bad. As I said, if you want a stress-free, profitable dental practice, these are the things that you absolutely do not want to do. Yet they're written up in articles, repeated often, and delivered with, a sage-wise look as if they actually have value. So what are some of these ideas? What are the absolutely terrible, in some cases, business-killing practice management concepts so that you know not to do them? Well, what I want to talk about this week is what I've kind of isolated as the top 5. The top 5, for a nice way of saying it, practice management myths. My name is Jeff Bloomberg, and I'm your host. I say we just jump right in. We'll start off with the first one on the list. It's you should always be booked out way in advance. For some people, this is a month in advance. For some people, this is 2 months in advance. And I'm talking about the doctor's schedule here. But the same concept applies to hygiene. Why is this a bad idea? Because, when you're booked out far in advance, I actually did an episode on this, how far the doctor should be booked out. But when you're booked out way in advance, there's security in that, right? Your schedule's full. You have production on the schedule. Everything's good. But you're actually limiting your productivity in a couple of different ways. I want you to imagine for a second, take a viewpoint of the consumer experience. So let's say I come into your practice and I'm a patient of record, let's say, and I need 3 crowns. And the first opening on your schedule is 6 weeks from now. Number one, that's just bad customer service. I should be receiving service as quickly as possible. Now take a new patient. Let's say it's a new patient and they need 3 or 4 crowns. That's what you've just diagnosed, and they're going to have to wait 6 weeks. This is extremely dangerous with a new patient because with a new patient, you have very little connection with this person. Maybe you really hit it off during the examination and they trust you. Maybe, you've just mentioned the idea that they need all this work and they think, okay, but you don't have that much of a connection. So making somebody wait in order to get this stuff done is actually very limiting from a productivity perspective. Okay. It's just not a good idea. You're limiting your growth. When you go to the hygiene schedule, that's even worse. And to give you an idea of how bad this can get, there was a recent survey done by the ADA, Health Policy Institute. They do this quarterly. It's called the Economic Survey. It's done of dentists, owners, and DSOs. And one of the questions was, it's actually one of the first ones, currently, how many business days does the average new patient have to wait for an initial appointment, excluding emergencies? So how many business days would a new patient have to wait? This is the Q1 2024 Economic Survey of Dentist Owners. How long does this new patient have to wait if they just need basically an initial? The average answer of all respondents was 14.6 days. That is terrible. And I know I'm talking about three things here, okay? We have the doctor's schedule, we have the hygiene schedule, and we have the new patient schedule. But let's just pick this new patient thing up for a second. You should be able to get a new patient in within 24 to 48 hours. 14.6 days is a terrible thing because, again, it really depends on how you're getting the new patient. If you're my dentist and I really like you and I refer my wife to your office, well, she may be happy to wait 14.6 days. I mean, obviously it's not 14.6, right? 15, 14, whatever it is. She may be perfectly happy to wait because I trust you. So by extension, she trusts you. Okay. Same thing if I refer a friend. But if you're getting this new patient from marketing, so you just sent out some marketing or you have a pay-per-click campaign, maybe it's a postcard, a newsletter or whatever, or pay-per-click, and they click or they call you, their connection to you is extremely fragile. It's thread thin. They don't know you from anybody. So they call your office. They're new to the area. They want to get their teeth cleaned and they have to wait 15 days. I would, I don't have metrics on this, but I would bet they're now looking at the next name to call. If they make an appointment, they're still looking if someone can get them in sooner, depending on how urgent it is to them to get their teeth cleaned, right? Or, and they may or may not call, they may schedule another appointment with somebody else and forget to call you back, or they may call you back. They don't have enough of a connection to you to make them wait that long. That's just bad service. As a dentist, if you can't get people in soon enough, especially if it's going to kill your sales, and we use the rule sales case acceptance because you're not getting me in soon enough to get my work done. You should really be able to get, ideally, if you're selling a case on Monday, you should be able to get the patient in that week, right? At worst, early next week. If it's later in the week, early next week. You should have some openings on your schedule where you can fit productive appointments within the next 3 to 4 days. Okay. Always. And, it's living a little bit more on the edge, but it makes you potentially more productive. Now, one last thing I'll say on this is you may find it, where am I going to put people? I'm booked out a month in advance and I have nowhere to fit anybody. Well, then your schedule may be the problem. So, I'd approach this in sort of a sequence, ratcheting up each action, and certain things may be in place and certain things may not. But let's say your schedule's crammed. You can't fit in. We're talking about the doctor's schedule now. You can't fit anybody in on the schedule for the next month. Well, the first thing I would look at is, how are you scheduled? Are you using a proper system to schedule your practice, right? Where you're on a 10-minute book and you're properly double booking. Maybe you're working with one assistant out of 2 chairs, which really isn't double booking. That's basically just, going from one chair to the other. You're saving yourself maybe 5 minutes. Proper double booking means there's an assistant in each room. So maybe organizing your schedule a bit and, having proper procedure times and what's doctor and assistant time. We talked about this in an episode a couple of years ago. We also do seminars on it here at MGE, on scheduling. I'll put a link to it on the episode webpage. Putting a scheduling system in place and having yourself properly staffed should, rather than running it linearly, we're one appointment after the other without using 2 chairs, can alleviate the pressure on your schedule and create some openings. But let's say you're already doing that, right? You are double booking and you can't fit any more patients in. Okay. Well, then it may be a situation where, is it possible to up your assistant's skill set? Maybe if somebody was in EFTA, they could do more of the procedure than your current assistant is doing, or maybe your assistant could learn some new things that might create a little bit more free time for you. That's usually not a huge problem, but it's something to think about. But let's say your assistants are maxed out. They're doing everything that they're allowed to do according to the Dental Practice Act in your state, and you're running a really efficient schedule and you can't fit anybody else in. There's a really good chance you need an associate doctor. Just something to think with. And then your schedule gets cleaned up a bit. You don't have to start that associate full time. If you have questions about this, we're happy to help you with it, but it's something to think with. Now, with relation to the hygiene schedule, if you can't get somebody in for 4 to 6 weeks, that is extremely dangerous. I'm not even talking about new patients if that's how you're seeing initials through hygiene. Here's the problem. Hygiene schedules tend to get a bit stale. And let me explain what I mean by that. Meaning, the people who are going to tend to easily populate your hygiene schedule are your best patients. I came in, I really cared about my teeth and my oral health. So you did the treatment that I needed, and I've been on your hygiene schedule, always keeping my appointment unless something drastic is happening in my life. You never have to remind me very much. I'm always there. I'm just really good about my dental health. So obviously when you talk to me 3 years from now and you do your exam, 2 years from now, a year from now, 3 years from now, I don't really need any treatment because I'm taking great care of my teeth. And I already did the treatment that you recommended when I first came in. Okay. So in your view, you may have a hygiene schedule full of people like me who need no work because we're your best patients. The patients who need the work are the patients that you are not calling in. And what do I mean by that? If you want a simple metric, very easy thing you could do is go and take a look at your software and look at how many charts you have, and then look at how many of those patients have a next appointment date after today. Now, what's common to see with this? You'll have 4,000, 3,000 active charts, and 600 or 700 will have an appointment after today. So what that tells you is the majority of your patient base is becoming stale or inactive. Stale is probably not the best adjective to use, but it's becoming inactive. You spent all the money getting those patients in as new patients, and now you're letting them just sort of waste away. I'll get into this in the next myth here in a little bit. But because you have no hygiene openings, you have no openings for the next 6 weeks, no one's chasing these patients, or calling these patients to get them back on the schedule. So then they just become more and more inactive. Your hygiene schedule becomes quote unquote cleaner and cleaner. You're not getting any work to do out of the hygiene schedule. And worse than that, you have all these patients whose health you're not maintaining or improving because they're not being called in. And why? Because you have zero availability on the hygiene schedule. If you're booked out that far, and assuming your schedules run correctly and you don't have a ton of, cancellations and no-shows, you probably need to add a hygienist or two. So it's something to think about and something to look at. But the idea that you should be booked out forever and a day to where you can't fit anybody in is just bad business. All right. So what's myth number 2? Kind of relates to what I was just talking about with regards to hygiene. When you have a patient you haven't seen for 2 years, that patient should be deactivated, or the word I used to hear a lot was purged, chart purges. I think that word lost, effectiveness after the movie The Purge, right? It has a bad connotation now. Anyway, and that's what people used to do in the 90s. You hear, we're doing chart purges. Patients who haven't been in 2 years, we're just getting rid of these charts. And if I had to pick one, myth that's probably one of the worst ideas, that is the complete opposite of what you would do in the business world, this is it. And why? Because, look, if you were calling this patient, let's say I came into your practice and let's say I had an appointment 6 months from now, we did whatever treatment we were going to do, and I was put on your hygiene schedule 6 months from now, and I didn't show. And then you called me all the time to try to get me to schedule over the next year and a half. And then 2 years came by after all these phone calls and all this follow-up, and then you wanted to deactivate me. Still wouldn't be right, but I would understand it more. But that's not usually what happens. Usually what happens is you go crazy getting me as a new patient. You do my work or not. I end up on your hygiene schedule. I miss my appointment, and then I maybe get 1 or 2 phone calls, a text, or an email. Year and a half goes by, and nobody's really called me. And if someone's doing chart audits because the office isn't busy, I always get the phone call because my last name starts with B. So then sometimes people will call A through D. Then you get busy again because you're making all those phone calls. And then you go, okay, let's try Z. So you start calling Z, and you get up to R. Nobody ever calls LMNO because, they're in the middle. But there's not enough work to actually retain this patient. So if there's all this work being done, I'd understand this more, but there's very little to no work being done in dental practice. So then what happens is I haven't been in 2 years. So everybody assumes that I've found another dentist. No one's talked to me, mind you, or I don't care about my teeth and I need to be made inactive. In the business world, this would make people laugh. It does make people laugh. If you go to any store, you go get your auto repaired, or you go to Nordstrom, or you go to Restoration Hardware, whatever, you go somewhere where you're going to give them your identity, meaning your email address or your name, right? You're on record. They never get rid of your name unless you tell them, please stop contacting me or you pass away. Once a customer, potentially always a customer. And for that matter, most businesses would kill for what you have built into your business model if you're a general dentist. People expect to see you twice a year. That's built into the psyche or into the mentality of everybody in the United States. You ask anybody in the U.S., hey, how often are you supposed to see the dentist? They'll tell you twice a year. That's, thanks Crest and Colgate. All right. So this is built into people's mentality, and you have this built into your model and you're not using it. So here's my reality on this. If someone is, you may be needing to do some follow-up, some phone calls and some reactivation, which is a whole separate matter. But unless a patient has either A, passed away, B, moved out of state, although that one always doesn't always apply, because in certain cases, I know people who live in one state and see a dentist in another every 6 months. I mean, I guess that's a problem if they have an emergency, but they love their dentist and they go back and see him when they visit their hometown. So that doesn't always apply, but they've passed away, they've moved out of state. Maybe then where they tell you, look, I never want to come back to your practice again, or you don't want the patient back and you have, causatively deactivated them. That is a reason to deactivate a chart. There is no other good reason to deactivate a chart. And to that end, I've said this often, you may have had, I'm sure you've seen this, patients come in, you haven't seen them in 5 years, and you go, wow, Bill, it's been 5 years since you've been in here. They just surprisingly end up on the schedule. And they go, yeah, doc, 5 years? It's been 5 years? No, it hasn't been this long. Yeah, the last time we saw you was 2019. Wow, time really flies. Okay, well, I'm here now. In their mind, you were always their dentist. So if anything, I would maintain continuous communication with these folks. I wouldn't purge their chart. I wouldn't deactivate your chart. Sure, it's depressing, especially when you look at your total chart numbers are, 4,000 and you're having trouble filling 3 days of hygiene a week, but that's your software giving you a message, folks. So the one question I get often is, what would I do with somebody who, let's say I've dropped their HMO. You were in an HMO and you dropped the HMO. Well, that gets a bit more difficult. With PPO patients, you can retain a ton of those. But here's what I would do if I dropped an HMO patient or a patient's HMO. Maybe they go, look, I can't be on your schedule anymore. I can't be a patient here anymore because, I'm no longer, you're no longer in my plan. Well, here's what I would do. I'd take them off the active recall schedule if they've left the practice, but then I would still send them my newsletters and any type of seasonal mailings that I send out. Why not? Because if you've been in an HMO before and dropped it, I guarantee you this has happened to you. You've had patients who went to the other HMO doctor, went, I hate this, I'm going back to my old dentist and paying full fee. That happens. So I'd at least continue to communicate them. You worked hard to get these people to come to your practice in the first place. Why do nothing to keep them? As a matter of fact, if you have a patient you haven't seen in 5 years that needed a lot of work and they come back into your practice, that patient is usually a lot easier to convert for their treatment than a new patient. Because why? They know you. So the idea that you should get rid of a chart just because the person hasn't been in there for 2 years is a horrid idea. Some people say, I've heard it for years. It's one of the worst that I've heard. So that's myth number 2. What's myth number 3? Well, if you've been listening to this podcast for any length of time and you've heard me talk about case acceptance, you'll know this one. The doctor should never discuss money with patients. Well, that is a total myth. The doctor should absolutely be willing to discuss finances with patients. Why? There's a couple of reasons. As an owner doctor, if you own your practice, or if you're just a doctor and you present your own treatment, let's talk about a doctor owner for a second. A doctor owner, whether they like it or not, has 3 basic jobs. First one is being a doctor, which that one you obviously already know. The second one is, as an owner, you are by default an executive. And the third one is you're the salesperson. You're the salesperson, the executive, and the doctor. Most of us are happy that, I love being the doctor, hate being the executive, really hate being the salesperson. This is one of those sort of things where it's, tough. This is your job, whether you like it or not. That being said, if you look at any job in a business, it has a specific outcome associated with it. For instance, let's say I had a schedule coordinator. By saying that title, just in and of itself, what would you expect this person to do? You'd expect them to schedule patients. Well, what would the outcome be that you would expect? Now, your first thought's probably a full schedule, but that's not totally correct because you could have a schedule full of denture relines. That doesn't work, right? We want a full, productive, efficiently done schedule, done in accordance with whatever your scheduling policy is. So you hire somebody, you pay them, they're a member of your team. That is the outcome that's expected from that particular job of schedule coordinator. All right, well, similarly, you have the salesperson, the executive, and the doctor job. Each of those jobs have their own outcomes. Well, what would be the outcome we would expect of a doctor? A well-done treatment, done at a high level of clinical quality, or a healthy patient. These would be the expectations we'd have of a doctor. How about an executive? Well, as an executive, we expect a growing, profitable business, right? What about a salesperson? If you hired somebody to sell treatment for you, what would you expect? You'd expect them to get closes. A salesperson closes. Part of closing is talking about finance. if you go to buy a car, and I hate to compare, car sales to this, but if I go to buy a car, I mean, obviously there's a sticker on the car with the price, but let's say there wasn't. And I'm talking to the salesperson and I ask them, how much does this car cost? And if they said, I have no idea, let's go talk to that person over there, Sally, you would laugh. That would be ridiculous. Or if you were talking to somebody about buying a car and then it even meant, did you like this car? Do you like how it drives? Did you enjoy the test drive? Okay, good. I'm going to have to, are you interested in the car? Yes, you are. Okay, good. I'm going to come have you talk to Joe. Well, then in your mind, who's the salesperson? Joe is. You aren't. You see? Or he isn't. So the salesperson talks finance. You have to talk money. Now, what's the second reason the doctor should talk finance beyond the fact that they are the salesperson? Ask your staff if you don't believe this. Ask them, who is a patient most likely to listen to in the practice? They will tell you uniformly, the doctor. So when you tell a patient something, it has more gravity, it has more meaning to them. So when you tell them this case is $10,000 and we're expecting, according to my treatment coordinator, $1,500 from your insurance company, how would you normally take care of a balance like this? Doesn't mean you have to take their credit card or fill out a finance app with them. That has more meaning to them, that has more gravity. And it doesn't make you look like you're just after money. And it doesn't make you look like you're just seeing dollar signs when you're looking at them. It means that you own a business. Okay. And the funny thing about it is 9 times out of 10, no one is ever going to give you a hard time about this. But that 1 time out of 10, someone will realize that that person is the anomaly, not the 9 out of 10 who didn't. I mean, you could try this. Start this on Monday. Right? Start telling patients how much something costs. And one may give you a hard time. You'll notice most people don't, but you'll notice your close rate go up. I've seen it that simple by just giving the doctor giving the patient the fee and doing nothing more and turning over to the treatment coordinator, which you should do more. And I've talked about that in prior episodes. You will see your close rate go up. But why don't doctors want to talk money? Well, I mean, people get a little bit loopy when it comes to money. If you don't believe me, ask your treatment coordinator. They've had patients who they've been talking to where everything seemed great. And then they mention the fee and it's like they're talking to somebody different. Right. And so there's all kinds of reasons why I'm saying reasons with quotation marks. Doctors aren't supposed to talk about finance. It lowers them in the patient's eyes. It's not very doctorly, et cetera, are all wrong. Right. It doesn't degrade you in any way. Also helps you with the most important thing, which is treatment acceptance, which is why we're there. Okay. And I would, as you're presenting the treatment plan, have your treatment coordinator there and realize that some people may still give you a hard time, but realize that they're the anomaly. The majority of people won't do that. Which brings us to myth number 4, which is the most important statistic in your practice, the most important health metric in your practice to how healthy your business is new patients. How many new patients you're seeing tells you how healthy your practice is. This is a complete myth if you are a general dentist. If you are a specialist, this is absolutely true. If you're an endodontist or an oral surgeon, this is 100% true. If you are a general dentist, this is completely false. New patients are important, but they are not the growth statistic for your practice. As a matter of fact, if I were to give one number to somebody and say, this is a statistic you should always keep to see whether your practice is growing or contracting, it would be this. It would be the number of recall patients in a given period of time, whether you're keeping this monthly or weekly. How many recall patients you are seeing per month. And by recall, I'm talking 3-month recall, 4-month recall, 6-month recall. Okay. Because that is a retention statistic. And if, look at it this way, if you were going to buy a practice, let's say this practice was doing $1 million and you had 2 options. One office is doing $1 million. The other office is doing $1 million. Office number 1, the doctor is producing $750 of that million. Hygiene's doing $250. The doctor is doing all types of advanced procedures. Office number 2, hygiene's doing $500,000 and the doctor's doing $500,000. They're both the same price. Which practice are you purchasing? I mean, if you're like me, you're purchasing the practice where hygiene's doing $500,000. Why? Because you have patient flow. Okay. So if you want to take a look at something, how healthy is my practice? Look at the number of recall patients because, not even ideally, but naturally, if more and more recall patients are coming into the practice on a routine basis, your hygiene department is growing, which means the new patients that you're getting, you're actually keeping. They're not just going into the inactive bin, so to speak. Okay. So otherwise, you're just wasting patients. You should ideally be seeing 60 to 70% of your revenues should be coming from your patients of record. From a sales perspective, when you're presenting treatment, that should be coming from your patients of record. And where are you going to see most of these? Of course, some of these are going to be, emergencies or consults or something of this nature, or just quick visits with a doctor. But the majority of these are going to be in your hygiene department. So it's also predictable. If I had a bunch of patients coming in today in my hygiene department and I wanted to look at what are going to be the opportunities I have for treatment conversions, I could look at the treatment I'd already diagnosed on these patients and I would have an idea of what I could potentially convert today. Whereas with new patients, it's completely and totally unpredictable. Which brings us to our last myth. I'm keeping these pretty brief. I've done some of this stuff in prior episodes, but I wanted to just throw this out there, which is this. And I've heard this from a lot of MGE clients. This is something they heard when they first got into practice, that you should join every plan you can join to make sure that your practice is busy. A lot of you hear this in dental school right before you graduate, or if you're maybe from an old professor in dental school as you're looking for a practice. I don't even need to get into this too heavily as far as joining PPOs, HMOs, and various types of government plans. It's a simple matter of math. And I'll be coming down with more. Actually, the last couple episodes, I've talked about this a little bit. This is just a simple matter of math. In an inflationary environment, which we've had, it's been 21% the last 4 years. And I've had some people comment, wow, 21%, how is that possible? You are correct in that in certain categories, it's been higher. But the average, if you take all the categories and the consumer price index, is 21%. Things like apparel are only 8%, whereas gas is 52%, food is over 30%. But it's a simple matter of math. In an inflationary environment, you cannot be in a position where you cannot move your fees in relation to inflation, which you can't do if you're in network. There's easy ways to get out of network. This is something that we're really, really, really driving in hard with our clients now to get every last one of them out of network. It's not as difficult as you think it might be. And in last week's episode, I mentioned that for a limited time, we're offering a free consultation, something that we normally only do with MGE Power clients, called the Roadmap to a Fee-for-Service Practice, where we will actually analyze what's going on in your practice. I had Sabri on the podcast and she spoke about exactly what happens when we do one of these, to take a look at, because every situation's different. There may be different levels of network infiltration. Obviously, if you're in the United States, if you're not in network, if you're in Canada, and you may be in some type of different plan if you're listening to this in Europe. But, everybody's situation is different. So we have to sort of walk people out based upon their expectations, what they're trying to achieve, and what would work best in their practice. If you'd like to take advantage of this roadmap, it is for a limited time only. I definitely recommend that you check it out. I'll put a link to it on the episode webpage. Anyway, a little bit of a more fun episode this week. I had to do one of those top 5 things. They're nice and clickbaity, right? So in next week's episode, we're going to start taking a look at current industry conditions, what's happening in the dental industry. There's some really surprising things going on, as well as some amazing opportunities that have opened up. I look forward to seeing you folks next week. Don't forget, I have the links to what I mentioned here in this week's episode on the episode webpage. If you have any questions or need help from us here at MGE, you can find us online at mgeonline.com or call us at 800-640-1140. Folks, have a great week, and I'll see you in the next episode.